Welcome back. So I am going to continue to read Tale of Despereaux. We left off about to read chapter 20, A View from a Chandelier. Do you know what a chandelier is? It's a beautiful light fixture. There was in the banquet hall a most beautiful and ornate chandelier. The crystals that hung from it caught the light of the candles on the table and the light from the face of the laughing princess. They danced to the rhythm of the minstrel's music, swaying back and forth, twinkling and beckoning. What better place to view with all its glory, all this beauty? There was so much laughing and singing and juggling that no one noticed as Roscuro crawled up the table leg and onto the table, and from there flung himself into the lowest branch of the chandelier. Hanging by one paw, he swung back and forth, admiring the spectacle below him, the smells of the food, the sound of the music, and the light, amazing, unbelievable. Roscuro smiled and shook his head. Unfortunately, a rat can hang from a chandelier for only so long before he is discovered. This would be true at even the loudest party. Reader, do you know who it was that spotted him? You're right, that sharp-eyed Princess P. A rat, she shouted. A rat is hanging from the chandelier. The party, as I have noted, was loud. The minstrels were strumming and singing. The people were laughing and eating. The man with the jingle cap was juggling and jingling. No one in the midst of all this merriment heard the P. No one except Roscuro. Rat! He had never before been aware of what an ugly word it was. Oh my goodness. There's a wonderful picture coming up here. Rat. In the middle of all that beauty, it immediately became clear that it was an extremely distasteful syllable. Rat. A curse, an insult, a word totally without light. And not until he heard it from the mouth of the princess did Roscuro realize that he did not like being a rat, that he did not want to be a rat. This revelation hit Roscuro with such force that it made him lose his grip on the chandelier. The rat reader fell, and alas, he fell right directly into the queen's bowl of soup. Oh my goodness. So we have a picture here of the rat hanging from the chandelier, and it says, a rat, she shouted, a rat hanging from the chandelier. Oh my goodness. I'm starting to connect bowls of soups and spoons. Do you remember the piles of the bowls of the bowls and the spoons in the dungeon? Oh goodness. I'm intrigued by what we read next. Chapter 21, The Queen's Last Words. The Queen loved soup. She loved soup more than anything in the world except for the Princess P and the King. And because the Queen loved it, soup was served in the castle for every banquet, every lunch, and every dinner. And what soup it was! Cook's love and admiration for the Queen and her palate moved the broth that she concocted from the level of mere food to a high art. On this particular day, for this particular banquet, the cook had outdone herself. The soup was a masterwork, a delicate mingling of chicken, watercress, and garlic. Roscuro, as he surfaced from the bottom of the Queen's capacious bowl, could not help taking a few appreciative sips. Lovely, he said, distracted for a moment from the misery of his existence. Delightful. See, shouted P. See, she stood. She pointed her finger right at Roscuro. It is a rat. I told you that it was a rat. He was hanging from the chandelier, and now he's in Mama's soup. The musicians stopped playing their guitars. The jugglers stopped juggling. The noble people stopped eating. The Queen looked at Roscuro. Roscuro looked at the Queen. Reader, in the spirit of honesty, I must utter a difficult and unsavory truth. Rats are not beautiful creatures. They are not even cute. They are really rather nasty beasts, particularly if one happens to appear in your bowl of soup with pieces of watercress clinging to his whiskers. There was a long moment of silence, and then Roscuro said to the Queen, I beg your pardon. In response, the Queen flung her spoon in the air and made an incredible noise, a noise that was in no way worthy of a queen, a noise somewhere between the neigh of a horse and the squeal of a pig, a noise that sounded something like, oink! And then she said, there's a rat in my soup. The Queen was really a simple soul, and always, her whole life, had done nothing except state the overly obvious. She died as she lived. There is a rat in my soup, were the last words she uttered. She clutched her chest and fell over backward. Her royal chair hit the floor with a thump, and the banquet hall exploded. Spoons were dropped, chairs were flung back. "Save her!" thundered the king. "You must save her!" All the king's men ran to try and rescue the queen. Roscuro climbed out of the bowl of soup. He felt that under the circumstances it would be best if he left. As he crawled across the tablecloth, he remembered the words of the prisoner in the dungeon, his regret that he did not look back at his daughter as he left her. And so Roscuro turned. He looked back, and he saw the princess was glaring at him. Her eyes were filled with disgust and anger. "Go back to the dungeon," was the look that she gave him. "Go back to the darkness where you belong." This look, reader, broke Roscuro's heart. Do you think that rats don't have hearts? Wrong. All things have hearts, and the heart of any living thing can be broken. If the rat had not looked over his shoulder, perhaps his heart would not have been broken, and it is possible then that I would not have a story to tell. But reader, he did look. Chapter 22. He puts his heart together again. Roscuro hurried from the banquet hall. "A rat," he said. He put his paw over his heart. "I am a rat, and there's no light for rats. There will be no light for me." The king's men were still bent over the queen. The king was still shouting, "Save her, save her," and the queen was still dead. Of course, when Roscuro encountered the queen's royal soup spoons lying on the floor, "I will have something beautiful," he said aloud. "I am a rat, but I will have something beautiful. I will have a crown on my own." He picked up the spoon, he put it on his head. And look at, it's just a sad picture. There he is, Roscuro the rat. He's taking the spoon and putting it on his head and says that he will have a crown. "Yes," said Roscuro, "I will have something beautiful, and I will have revenge, both things somehow." There are those hearts, reader, that never mend again once they are broken. Or if they do mend, they heal themselves in a crooked and lopsided way, as if sewn together by a careless craftsman. Such was the fate of Roscuro. His heart was broken. Picking up the spoon and placing it on his head, speaking of revenge, these things helped him to put his heart together again, but it was, alas, put together wrong. "Where is the rat?" shouted the king. "Find the rat!" "If you want me," muttered Roscuro as he left the banquet hall, "I will be in the dungeon in the darkness." Stop barking, Bodhi. There were, of course, dire consequences for Roscuro's behavior. Every action, reader, no matter how small, has a consequence. For instance, the young Roscuro gnawed on Gregory the jailer's rope, and because he gnawed on the rope, a match was lit in his face. And because a match was lit in his face, his soul was set afire. The rat's soul was set afire because of this. He journeyed upstairs, seeking the light. Upstairs in the banquet hall, the Princess Peace spotted him and called out the word rat. And because of this, Roscuro fell into the queen's soup. And because the rat fell into the queen's soup, the queen died. You can see, can't you, how everything is related to everything else? You can see quite clearly how every action has a consequence. Because the queen died while eating soup, the heartbroken king outlawed soup. And because soup was outlawed, so were all the instruments involved in the making and eating of soup, spoons, bowls, and kettles. These things were collected from all the people of the kingdom of Dor, and they were piled in the dungeon. And because Roscuro was dazzled by the light of one match and journeyed upstairs and fell into the queen's soup, and the queen died, and the king ordered the death of every rat in the land, the king's men went bravely into the dungeon to kill the rats. But the thing about killing a rat is that you must first find a rat. And if a rat does not want to be found, reader, he will not be found. The king's men succeeded only in getting lost in the dungeon's tortuous mazes. Some of them, in fact, did not ever find their way out again and died there in the dark heart of the castle. And so the killing of all rats was not successful. And in desperation, King Philip declared that all rats were illegal. He declared them outlaws. This, of course, was a ridiculous law, as rats are outlaws to begin with. How can you outlaw an outlaw? It is a waste of time and energy, but still, the king officially decreed that all rats in the kingdom of Dor were outlaws and should be treated as such. When you are a king, you may make as many ridiculous laws as you like. That is what being a king is all about. But reader, we must not forget that King Philip loved the queen, and that without her he was lost. This is the danger of loving. No matter how powerful you are, no matter how many kingdoms you rule, you cannot stop those you love from dying. making soup illegal, outlawing rats. These things soothe the poor king's heart, and so we must forgive him. And what of the outlawed rats? What of the outlawed rat in particular? What of Roscuro? In the darkness of the dungeon, he sat in his nest with a spoon atop his head. He set to work, fashioning for himself a kingly cape made out of the scrap of red tablecloth, and as he worked, old one-eared Botticelli Rimorso sat next to him, swinging his locket back and forth, saying, "You see what comes from a rat going upstairs? I hope you've learned your lesson. Your job in this world is to make others suffer." "Yes," muttered Roscuro, "yes, that is exactly what I intend to do. I will make the princess suffer for how she looked at me." And as Roscuro worked and planned, the jailer Gregory held tight to his rope and made his own way through the darkness. And in the dank cell, the prisoner who had once had a red tablecloth and now had nothing spent his days and nights weeping quietly. High above the dungeon, upstairs in the castle, a small mouse stood alone. One evening at his brothers and sisters sniffed crumbs. He stood with his head cocked to one side, listening to a sweet sound he did not yet have a name for. There would be consequences of the mouse's love for music. You, reader, already know some of those consequences. Because of the music, the mouse would find his way to a princess. He would fall in love. And speaking of consequences, the same evening that Despereaux stood inside the castle, hearing music for the first time, outside the castle, in the gloom of dusk, more consequences drew near. A wagon driven by a king's soldiers and piled high with spoons and bowls and kettles was making its way to the castle. And beside the soldiers there sat a young girl with ears that looked nothing so much as a young girl with ears that looked like nothing as much as pieces of cauliflower stuck on either side of her head. The girl's name, reader, was Miggery Sow, and though she did not yet know it, she would be instrumental in the helping the rat work his revenge. End of second book. Book third, Gore, the Tale of Miggery Sow. So this is the girl that has ears that look like cauliflower. Can't wait to see a picture of her. Chapter 24, A Handful of Cigarettes, a Red Tablecloth, and a Hen. Again, reader, we must go backward before we can go forward. With that said, here begins a short history of the life and times of Miggery Sow, a girl born into the world many years before the mouse Despereaux and the rat Chiaroscuro, a girl born far from the castle, a girl named for her father's favorite prize-winning pig. Miggery Sow was 6 years old when her mother, holding on to Mig's hand and staring directly into Mig's eyes, died. "Ma," said Mig, "Ma, couldn't you stay here with me?" "Oh," said her mother, "who is that? Who is that holding my hand?" "It's me, Ma, Miggery Sow." "Ah, child, let me go." "But I want you to stay here," said Mig, wiping first her runny nose and then her runny eyes. "You want," said her mother. "Yes, Mig, I want." "Yes," said Mig, "I want." "Ah, child, and what does it matter what you are wanting?" said her mother. She squeezed Mig's hands once and twice, and then she died, leaving Mig alone with her father, who on a market day in a spring soon after his wife's death sold his daughter into service for a handful of cigarettes, a red tablecloth, and a hen. "Papa," said Mig when her father was walking away from her with the hen in his arms, a cigarette in his mouth, and a red tablecloth draped across his shoulders like a cape. "Go on, Mig," he said. "You belong to that man now." "But I don't want to go, Papa," she said. "I want to go with you." She took hold of the red tablecloth and tugged on it. "Lord, child," her father said, and who is you asking what you want? Go on now." He untangled her fingers from the cloth and turned in her direction of the man who bought her. Meg watched her father walk away, the red tablecloth billowing out behind. He left his daughter, and reader, you already know. He did not look back, not even once. Can you imagine it? Can you imagine your father selling you for a tablecloth, a hen, and a handful of cigarettes? Close your eyes, please, and consider it for a moment. Can you imagine? Oh, poor Miggery Sow. Okay, done? I hope that the hair on the back of your neck stood up as you thought of Mig's fate and how it would be if it were your own. Poor Mig, what will become of her? This dog is driving me crazy, throwing tennis balls, wanting me to be not throwing, dropping them in my lap. Sorry, poor Mig, what will become of her? You must, frightened though you may be, read on and see for yourself. Reader, it is your duty. Okay, we're going to go on. Chapter 25, A Vicious Circle. Miggery Sow called the man who purchased her uncle, as he said she must, and also he said she must. Mig tended Uncle's sheep and cooked Uncle's food and scrubbed Uncle's kettle. She did all this without a word of thanks or praise from the man himself. Another unfortunate fact of life with Uncle was that he very much liked giving Mig what he referred to as a good clout to the ear. In fairness to Uncle, it must be reported that he did always inquire whether or not Mig was interested in receiving the clout. Their daily exchanges went something like this. Uncle, I thought I told you to clean the kettle. Mig, I cleaned it, Uncle. I cleaned it good. Uncle, it's filthy. You have to be punished, won't you? Mig, gore, Uncle. I cleaned the kettle. Uncle, are you saying I'm a liar, girl? Mig, no, Uncle. The uncle says, do you want a good clout to the ear then? Mig, no, thank you, Uncle. I don't. Alas, Uncle seemed to be entirely unconcerned with what Mig wanted, as her mother and father had been. The discussed clout to the ear was always delivered, I am afraid, with a great deal of enthusiasm on Uncle's part, and received with absolutely no enthusiasm at all on the part of Mig. These clouts were alarmingly frequent, and Uncle was scrupulously fair in paying attention to both the right and the left side of Miggery Sow. So it was, time after time, the young Mig's ears came to resemble not so much as ears as pieces of cauliflower stuck to either side of her head. That's an actual thing that happens to people who have damage to their ears. They call it cauliflower ear, and their ears get really big and look like pieces of cauliflower. As they became about as useful to her as pieces of cauliflower, that is to say, they all but ceased their functioning as ears. Words for Mig lost their sharp edges, and then they lost their edges altogether and became blurry, blankety things that she had a great deal of trouble making any sense of at all. The less Mig heard, the less she understood. The less she understood, the more things she did wrong. And the more things she did wrong, the more clouts to the ear she received. And the less she heard. This is what is known as a vicious circle. And Miggery Sow was right in the corner of it, which is not, reader, where anybody wants to be. But then, as you know, what Miggery Sow wanted had never been much of a concern to anyone. Chapter 26, Royalty. When Mig turned 7 years old, there was no cake, no celebration, no singing, no present, no acknowledgement of her birthday at all, other than Mig saying, Uncle, today I'm 7 years old, and Uncle saying in return, did I ask you how old you were today? Get out of my face before I give you a good clout to the ear. Oh, I'm so sad for Miggery Sow. What a horrible life she's living. I hope it gets better for her. A few hours after receiving her birthday clout to the ear, Mig was out in the field with Uncle's sheep when she saw something glittering and glowing on the horizon. She thought for a moment it was the sun, but she turned and saw the sun was in the west, where it should be, sinking to join the earth. This thing that shone so brightly was something else. Mig stood in the field and shaded her eyes with her left hand and watched the brilliant light draw closer and closer and closer until it revealed itself to be King Philip and his Queen Rosemary and their daughter, the young Princess P. The royal family was surrounded by knights in shining armor and horses in shining armor, and atop each of the members of the royal family's head there was a golden crown. And they were all, the king, the queen, and the princess, dressed in robes decorated with jewels and sequins that glittered and glowed and captured the light of the setting sun and reflected it back. Gore, breathed Mig. The Princess P was riding on a white horse that picked up its legs very high and set them down very daintily. The P saw Mig standing and staring at the raised hand to her. Hello, the princess called out merrily. Hello, and she waved her hand again. Mig did not wave back. Instead, she stood and watched. Gore, breathed Mig. So here she is. Okay, and you can see her. Look at her ears. Can you see how big they are? And you can see in the distance there the horses. Open mouth as the perfect, beautiful family passed her by. Papa, called the princess to the king, what is wrong with the girl? She will not wave at me. Never mind, said the king. It is of no consequence, my dear. But I'm a princess, and I waved to her. She should wave back. Meg, for her part, continued to stare, looking at the royal family had awakened some deep and slumbering need in her. It was as if a small candle had been lit in her interior, sparked to life by the brilliance of the king and the queen and the princess. For the first time in her life, Meg hoped. And hope is like love, a ridiculous and wonderful, powerful thing. Meg tried to name this strange emotion. She put a hand up to touch one of her aching ears, and she realized that the feeling she was experiencing, the hope blooming inside of her, felt exactly the opposite of a good clout. She smiled and took her hand away from her ear. She waved to the princess. "Today's my birthday," Meg called out, but the king and the queen and the princess were far too far away to hear. "Today," shouted Meg, "I am 7 years old." Oh, Megarisow. Oh. Let's hear what happens. Chapter 27, A Wish. That night, in the small dark hut that she shared with Uncle and the sheep, Meg tried to speak of what she had seen. "Uncle," she said. "Huh? I saw some human stars today." "How's that?" "I saw them all glittering and glowing, and there was a little princess wearing her own crown and riding on a little white tippity-toed horse." "What are you talking about?" said Uncle. "I saw a king and a queen and an itty-bitty princess," shouted Meg. "So?" shouted Uncle back. "I would like," said Meg shyly, "I wish to be one of them princesses." "Har!" laughed Uncle. "Har, an ugly dumb thing like you? You ain't even worth the enormous lot I paid for you. Don't I wish every night that I had back that good hand and that red tablecloth in your place?" He did not wait for Meg to guess the answer to his question. "I do," he said. "I wish it every night. That tablecloth was the color of blood. That head could lay eggs like nobody's business." "I want to be a princess," said Meg. "I want to wear a crown." "A crown?" Uncle laughed. "She wants to wear a crown." He laughed harder. He took the empty kettle and put it atop his head. "Look at me," he said. "I'm a king. See my crown? I'm a king, just like the one I wanted to be. I'm a king because I want to be one." He danced around the hut with the kettle on his head. He laughed until he cried, and then he stopped dancing. He took the kettle from his head and looked at Meg and said, "Do you want a good clout to the ear for such nonsense?" "No, thank you, Uncle," said Meg. But she got one anyway. "Look here," said Uncle after the clout had been delivered. "We will hear no more talk of princesses. Besides, whoever asked you what you wanted in this world, girl?" The answer to that question, reader, as you well know, was absolutely no one. Chapter 28, To the Castle. Years passed. Meg spent them scrubbing the kettle and tending the sheep and cleaning the hut and collecting innumerable, uncountable, extremely painful clouts to the ear. In the evening, spring or winter, summer or fall, Meg stood in the field as the sun set, hoping that the royal family would pass again before her. Gore, I'd like to see that little princess another time, wouldn't I? And her little pony, too, with its tippity-toed feet. This hope, this wish, that she would see the princess again was lodged deep in Meg's heart. Lodged firmly right next to it was the hope that she, Megarisow, could someday become a princess herself. The first of Meg's wishes was granted, in a roundabout way, when King Philip outlawed soup. The king's men were sent out to deliver the grim news and to collect from the people of the kingdom of Dor their kettles, their spoons, and their bowls. Reader, you know exactly how and why this law came to pass, so you would not be surprised as Uncle was when one Sunday a soldier of the king knocked on his door of the hut that Meg and Uncle and the sheep shared, and announced that soup was against the law. "How's that?" said Uncle. "By royal order of King Philip," repeated the soldier, "I am sent here to tell you that soup has been outlawed in the kingdom of Dor. You will, by order of the king, never again consume soup, nor will you think of it or talk about it. And I, as one of your king's loyal servants, am here to take from you your spoons, your kettle, and your bowls." "But that can't be," said Uncle. "Nevertheless it is." "What'll we eat?" "And what'll we eat with?" "Cake," suggested the soldier, "with a fork." "And wouldn't that be lovely," said Uncle, "if we could afford to eat cake?" The soldier shrugged. "I am only doing my duty. Please hand over your spoons, your bowls, and your kettle." Uncle grabbed a hold of his beard. He let go of his beard and grabbed the hair of his head. "Unbelievable," he shouted. "I suppose next the king will be wanting my sheep and my girl, seeing as those are the only possessions I have left." "Do you own a girl?" said the soldier. "I do," said Uncle, "a worthless one, but still she's mine." "Ah," said the soldier, "that I am afraid is against the law too. No human may own another in the kingdom of Dor." but I paid for her, and square, with a good laying hen, and a handful of cigarettes, and a blood-red tablecloth. No matter, said the soldier, it is against the law to own another. Now, you will hand her over to me, if you please, your spoons, your bowls, your kettle, and your girl. Or if you choose not to hand over these things, then you will come with me to be imprisoned in the castle dungeon. Which will it be? And that is how Miggery Sow came to be sitting in a wagon full of soup-laden items next to a soldier of the king. Do you have parents? Asked the soldier. I will return you to them. Huh? A ma, shouted the soldier. Dead, said Mig. Your pa, shouted the soldier. I ain't seen him since he sold me. Right, I'll take you to the castle then. Gore, said Mig, looking around the wagon in confusion. You want me to paddle? To the castle, shouted the king. I'll take you to the castle. The castle? Where the itty-bitty princess lives? That's right. Gore, said Mig. I'm to be a princess too someday? That's a fine dream, said the soldier. He clucked to the horse and tapped the reins, and they took off. I'm happy to be going, said Mig, putting a hand up gently and touching one of her cauliflower ears. Might just as well be happy seeing as it doesn't make any difference to anyone but you, if you are or not, said the soldier. We will take you to the castle, and they will set you up fine. You will no longer be a slave. You will be a paid servant. Huh? Said Mig. You will be a servant, shouted the soldier, not a slave. Gore, said Mig, satisfied. A servant I will be, not a slave. She was 12 years old. Her mother was dead. Her father had sold her. Her uncle, who wasn't her uncle at all, had clouded her until she was almost deaf. And she wanted more than anything in the world to be a little princess, wearing a golden crown and riding a high-stepping white horse. Reader, do you think that's a terrible thing to hope when there's really no hope at all? Or is it that the soldier said about happiness, something you might as well do just since in the end it really makes no difference to anyone but you? Okay, so I'm going to leave off, and I have some more of the book that I'm going to try to get recorded before spring break. I hope you are enjoying this beautiful book, Tale of Despereaux, and I'll see you next time.